Moving on to the cylinder portion of this series of videos. Previously, we used two masks to create these two shapes, a positive and a negative mask. We will need an additional mask for the cylinder because you can see the top of the cylinder. So we are going to need an additional mask. Again, I have the positive and the negative, just like we used for the sphere and the cone. Then I printed out another copy and I cut out just the very top of the cylinder. I will put this image up on the screen once again so that if you choose to do so, you can take a screenshot and use the same image that I am using to paint your own cylinder. At first glance, this probably looks a little bit more difficult compared to what we've done previously, simply because you're dealing with an additional mask that needs to be lined up. It is slightly more difficult, but I'm going to show you a very simple method to pull this off that works extremely well. I'm using Createx Illustration Violet in this demonstration. My air pressure is still the same, the reduction is still the same, and I'll be using the same airbrush as we've used previously. So let's dive in. I went ahead and placed the first mask onto the canvas the same way that we did in the previous videos, using two pieces of tape at the very top edge of the mask so that we can hinge it up out of the way when needed. As you can see, this mask has the larger portion of the cylinder cut out. I also have this mask, which has the upper portion of the cylinder cut out. What I'm going to do before I begin painting is I'm going to slide the second mask directly underneath our first mask. And I'm going to take my time and make sure I get these lined up exactly where I want them. That is pretty darn close. Both of these images were printed from the same image, so they should be very close in relation to where they were printed on these two sheets of paper. Once I have the second mask placed where I want it, I'm going to do the opposite and tape the bottom edge of this mask. So now the upper mask can be hinged up out of the way, and the bottom mask can be hinged down out of our way. It is possible to line this mask up later after you've already painted the larger portion of the cylinder. This just makes it a little bit easier. I'm going to burnish the edge of this down so that the tape doesn't allow the mask to fall too much while we are working on this mask. Our light source hasn't changed. I'll be using the same light source that we used previously, and the painting process hasn't changed. The process is the same as what we've done in the previous two videos. The only real difference at this point is we're adding multiple masks to the equation because we have a three-dimensional object. So I'm going to begin by spraying a very light layer of paint around the back side of our cylinder. This is the side that is in shadow. I want to retain that secondary reflected highlight down here in the bottom corner, so I'm going to ease off as I'm working my way down. This is the shadowed side, so I want this edge to be quite a bit darker. Again, I'm spraying more on the paper shield than I am on the paper canvas. Remember to aim your airbrush in the direction that you want the overspray to go. And try to control your loose paper mask. You can hinge it up to have a look. That looks all right. The left side, again, this is where our highlight will be, but the highlight is going to be offset because this is a rounded object. So I still want a pretty dark defined line on the left edge. I'm taking this line all the way to the bottom because secondary reflected highlight is over here. It's dark on this side. Hopefully you can see I'm primarily spraying on the paper mask directly next to that cut edge and allowing the overspray to drift over, and that's what's creating that nice sharp dark defined line. Once I have a pretty consistent darkness on the actual mask, that should give me pretty good consistent line on the canvas as well. So at this point I'll start working from probably around the center of the cone, once again spraying lines all the way across, or at least halfway across. Begin shading the shadowed side of our cylinder in. Don't forget to leave your secondary reflected highlight. I almost forgot myself. softly blending this down toward that reflected highlight. It's very dark near the top, and it's gradually getting a little bit lighter as we get toward that reflected highlight. I'm still just creating lines. I'm a little further away from the canvas to get that thick, soft line, and that helps you to blend your colors. The color is obviously going to get somewhat lighter as it gets closer to the highlight. Darken up the upper corner a little bit more. Our highlight area is going to be right in this area. So I can bring some of the shadow a little further in on the left side as well. Remember to watch where you're placing your fingers and hands so that you don't wind up with an outline of one or the other in your actual artwork. That's looking pretty good as far as that cylindrical shape. We've got a nice highlight going right through there. Dark shadow on this side, dark shadow on that side. We can carry the shadow on the left side up from the bottom now. Trying to match what we created above. Next, I'll carry the shadow on the right side down. Probably not going to take it all the way down straight like we did on the left side. I may curve it off just a little bit toward that secondary reflected highlight just to give it a little bit of interest, to make it look like it's not just straight up and down. Notice how I brought some of that darkness all the way down to the left of our secondary highlight, trying to keep that darkness roughly the same width as it travels up. So I need to add a little bit more at the top. Take a look. That looks pretty good. Now we need to add a little bit more definition to the very bottom of this cylinder. To do that, it's very similar to the dark shadow on the very edges. I'm going to spray more on the actual loose shield. Than I am on the canvas. I'm not taking the line all the way across. Probably add a little bit more right in that area where that dark shadow nearly comes all the way to the bottom. That looks pretty good. At this point, I will take a piece of tape and tape our upper shield up out of my way. Now we can begin working on the top portion of the cylinder. So what I want to do in order to not lose that defined edge of the top of our cylinder is I want the back edge of the top to be quite a bit darker, and then it will get lighter as it comes toward that darker edge. Because we have this loose shield masked on the bottom edge, I'm going to take another piece of tape and put it up here in order to hold that in place. So again, I want the top edge on the right side to be the darkest portion of this. Now remember, our light source is coming from over here, so there's going to be some light hitting the top of this as well. Very lightly, just like we did previously, I'm spraying on the paper shield more than I am on the canvas and letting that paint drift onto the canvas. Same thing on the other side, but again, I want to add just a little bit of a line here. I don't want to carry this all the way across. The overspray will carry it across and make it more believable. You can lightly go over that middle section. Just a couple of times. Now again, primarily the left side would be in highlight, so we can add just a faint little bit of this color on that side. The shadowed side is going to come down to this edge, obviously, but we don't want it to be not even close to as dark as the shadow was on the base. Just a little bit of color. I'm fogging it in here. Not really even doing lines at this point. I'm sort of doing little half circles. Again, you want to be careful about getting this too dark because you don't want to lose the separation on the bottom side. So let's take that down and have a look. That looks pretty good. I need to clean up how harsh that transition is between the really dark area there and the rest of it. We can do that simply by fogging a little bit more color in and around that area. That looks better, and what you might notice is we have a super strong, very thin lined highlight separating the two as well, and that's simply because the way that my masks were oriented, they were just a hair bit off. That actually adds to it. That was just a lucky break. I didn't do that intentionally, but it does make for a nice effect. Now, just like we did before, we can come in with an eraser and really bring out the highlight simply by going straight up and down, or as straight up and down as you can get. And you can vary your pressure. More pressure will remove paint quicker. Lighter pressure will remove paint a little less quick and a little more softly. You can also play with different types of erasers. This particular eraser is pretty aggressive to begin with. It takes paint off really easy. A softer eraser, like a pencil eraser, pink eraser you find on the end of a regular pencil, is a much softer eraser that will erase things and give you a nicer blend. On the very top, we can add just a little bit of the highlight up here. I think that looks pretty good. Again, we still have a nice separation between the side of the cylinder and the top of the cylinder with that really defined dark shadow there. The highlights might be a little bit stark. A softer eraser would do a better job, but this is the basics. This is what I wanted you to get from this. So at this point, I'll go ahead and remove these two masks. And we can bring in the cutout portion of the lower part of our cylinder. tape it into place. There you can really see some of the overspray around that cylinder that I got because overspray was blowing underneath the mask. Again, that's very difficult to control that. You can come in with an eraser and clean that up if you want to. This is more about learning how to control loose paper masks that blow around a lot when the air is hitting it from the airbrush. And then we can create our shadow. We'll do that the same way that we did the other shadows, just dragging paint off of the mask. Starting on the mask and taking my strokes off of the mask. This is a cylinder, so you want to make or attempt to make your shadow look like a cylinder shape to some degree. It doesn't have to be perfect. Go ahead, some tip dry there. Make sure it's dry. And once again, you can see how nicely that secondary reflected highlight really differentiates the actual cylinder from the shadow. The secondary highlight could probably be a little bit darker now that I see it in contrast to the shadow, but that's the basic idea. And that pretty much wraps up the cylinder for this series of videos. Again, this is all practice. You're practicing lines as well as some dagger strokes, which in turn is also helping you to practice your blends, blending those lines together to get those really nice transitions between tonal values in your artwork. You're also practicing learning to control your overspray with a very light or loose paper mask. You will never 100% completely eliminate overspray with that type of shield because the air from the airbrush is going to move it around. But if you can learn to control it, either by aiming your airbrush in a different direction and minimize that overspray, that will absolutely help your artwork in the future. So I hope you got something out of this. I hope all of that made sense. If you did, remember to like, subscribe, and share. Once again, I'll leave links in the description below where you can get all of the products that I used in this video. I'm Trevor with Wicked Art Studio. I'll see you all next time.